Well, hey everybody, today is April 20th and I want to welcome you to your online Bible study. This is Living Power. My name is Shannon Mullins and it's my pleasure to have you with me today. If you're just now joining the class, I want to welcome you and tell you how excited I am that you are here. We are in the book of 2 Samuel and we are studying the life of David, and David today becomes king of Judah. Not yet king of all Israel, but today he is crowned and anointed king of Judah, which is a very significant event, not only in his life, but in the life of the nation of Israel. Today I want to share with you teaching about two main things. The first thing I'd like to talk about is what was the most common way that the people would inquire of the Lord, and how did he tell them? Should we go and fight? Yes or no? In the beginning of the reading today, David inquires of the Lord, and it says, David asked, should I move back to one of the towns of Judah? And it says, yes, the Lord replied. Well, how are we to understand that? So I would like to share with you the means by which the people at this period in history, and since the formation of the tabernacle, inquired of the Lord. Second thing I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about the mighty men. We read in the text today about David's mighty men, so I want to share with you why that's important and what we can understand from that. So in order to understand how David inquired of the Lord, we have to understand back in the book of the law, God had given Moses instructions to build the tabernacle, and he gave very elaborate instructions for the priestly garments, and he gave instructions for the ephod, which would be the breastplate that the priests wore. Inside the ephod were two things which we've not yet talked about: Urim, U-R-I-M, and Thummim, Thummim. You can Google those and learn just a little bit more about those if you want. But these were the objects that maintained or were kept in the high priest's possession, and they were the objects used to determine the will of God. They were first mentioned in Exodus as being kept by the high priest in the breastplate of judgment. So I believe that he wore these on his chest in the ephod. And they apparently were two objects which served as sacred lots. So don't think of it as dice, even though that's an easy way for us to understand it. We roll the dice and we don't have any control of where the numbers stop. Is it going to stop on a 1 or a 2 or a 5 or whatever? But we can understand that they did use these two objects. The high priest would use them, and somehow they were given or shaken from a bag, and however they fell out, it was clear. If it fell in this whatever manner, it was a yes, and if it fell however, it was a no. And that's how they determined the will of the Lord. And did God have to answer? No, he did not. They could cast the die, cast the lots, and they were not automatic, they were not mechanical. It wasn't like, people people playing cards now, how they can trick the deck or whatever. It wasn't like that. God did not have to answer. And in yesterday's reading, God did not answer Saul. And so sometimes you would get a yes, sometimes you would get a no, and sometimes you wouldn't get an answer at all. It was a faithful and true method that God had ordained himself to inquire of the Lord and figure out the will of the Lord. Now, we don't use this method today because in the church age we have the power of the Holy Spirit, and we have God living in us, which is a more preferred, a higher method that we can inquire. We have direct access today through the death of Jesus Christ, that we can approach the throne in prayer, and we can inquire of the Lord, and the Holy Spirit will speak to us individually and directly. So I just wanted to mention that to you. This is the process. You have been reading about this. People have inquired of the Lord oftentimes. Do I go and attack? Do I, in this case, move back to Judah? And this was the way that they did it up until this period. There is going to be some point in our reading where this will stop, and we will not see this again. So we'll have to look for that and see when in the history of Israel did this process of inquiring of the Lord in this way actually cease. Okay, we begin 2 Samuel today. David is no longer a fugitive. David becomes king of Judah. He's 30 years old, and he is king of Judah for 7.5 years. So he's got a little bit of a wait before he becomes king of all Israel. But I'll let you in on a little secret, and it does happen in 7.5 years from now. Saul's son is king in the upper portion. You look on your map, in the upper portion of Israel, and he is king for 2 years. He ends up getting assassinated later. But David makes Hebron his capital, which is where God told him to go. David at this point has 6 wives and 7 sons. Bathsheba has not yet entered into the picture. Now let's talk a little bit about David's mighty men. I don't know if you ever watch Merlin. It's a show that we watch on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I love it because it talks about, it's an English program. It's extremely good, and it talks about the plights of King Arthur. So if any of you are watching from that program, I want you to know it's a great show. You guys are doing awesome. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Remember how loyal the knights were. We're going to circle back to that. So keep that in mind. Remember the book that story I'm sure that you heard as a child, the Knights of the Round Table, and how loyal they were to King Arthur. Well, with that in mind, let's look at David's mighty men. We see that there was a hierarchy to how he had established his army. There were 3, and notice the 3 is capital T. So there was a band of 3 among 30, and there's 30 is a capital T also, so we can understand this as a proper name. In my research, I learned that 30 is a technical term for a small military contingent known in Hebrew. The 30 probably at some point had 30 men, but did you notice in the reading today there were more than 30 in the 30? There were 37 men in all. So I did some digging, and I thought, well, why is that? Why are there 37 men in the group called the 30? Well, it's supposed that some died and then others would have been added, but you wonder maybe why didn't they take the name off the roll? They didn't. They ended up with 37 in the 30. It's an honor roll for sure. You know how they post, remember in school how they would post the honor roll, at least when I was going to school, post honor roll in college and post the grades outside the door, and you'd go look and who's on the honor roll, and this is an honor roll for sure. Nothing else is known of their exploits, so we can know that these were strong, powerful, fearless warriors, and they were very talented, and they were on David's army. And these men came from all over. Some were even foreigners. When I read that, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Some had defected from Saul's army. Remember, we talked about that over the last couple of days. And I find it interesting that there's one man not listed that I thought might have been listed, and there's one man that is listed that made me turn my head just a little bit. Joab is not listed, and he was the commander of the whole army under David's reign. So I don't know why he's not listed, but he's not listed there. And in 2 Samuel 23, verse 3, there's someone that I bet you know that's listed there in the 30 of the mighty men, and it's Uriah the Hittite. Now, if that doesn't ring a bell, let me remind you, we haven't read this yet, but do you remember the story of David and Bathsheba? And he sees her bathing, and he wants her, and she's married, so he sends out the husband into the front lines of battle to be killed. This is not in such a good moment in David's life. We haven't gotten there yet in our reading, but we will. And I know some of you remember that story. This is the man, Uriah the Hittite. This is the man that's the husband of Bathsheba. So I wonder if his brave deed on the front lines when David sent him out to be killed so he could have his wife is what got him listed in this honor roll. Or what would be maybe even worse, I thought, was he one of David's mighty men before David sent him out into the battlefield? Ooh, that kind of makes the deed even more sinister, doesn't it? So it's just something to think about. He is listed in 1 Chronicles 11, verse 20 to 27. That's the same list. It's a duplicate list. It's in 2 Samuel and it's in 1 Chronicles, but there's 16 more names listed after him in 1 Chronicles. And we can understand that to mean 1 Chronicles was written later, so they were just added after 2 Samuel was written. That could be why it's listed that way. What can we learn from the mighty men? The main thing is that they demonstrated God's provision for David. You know, oftentimes we doubt God. Is he going to be able to take care of us? Is he going to be able to equip us to what he's calling us to do? Well, here we see yet again another example that, yes, God is calling David to something great. He calls you and I to great things in our life also. God has a plan for each one of us, you included. You, me, everyone, God has a plan. And this just shows that God equips. When he calls, he equips. And this was a clear example of God's provision for David. Notice the men came on their own. It reminded me of the time the animals came on their own to Noah on the ark. And notice the men were very, very skilled. Now, here's a couple of things that they do later on. Some of them are... These stories are in the Bible, some are not, but I just want to give you kind of an introductory look at what the mighty men were capable of doing with David. What did they accomplish, and why is this even listed in the Bible? Well, this group was able to neutralize the threat of the Philistines, and the Philistines had been a thorn in Israel's side since the days of Samson. This was huge. They were never again a threat after this point. David, through and with these mighty men, are able to establish a perimeter of safety for the nation. The nation grows in size under David's rule through this army. David and these men also bring Moab and Edom under his control and extends the kingdom. He was able to conquer the people along the borders of Israel and made them vassal states and had to pay tribute to him. And so in doing that, not only is he creating this border of protection, but he's creating an income source. And they end up paying tribute to the nation of Israel. This does two things. It allows the nation of Israel to become very prosperous during David's rule and Solomon's rule, who is David's son that's not yet born. But it also allows them, the Israelites, access to precious iron ore that they are able to use to build the temple and that they needed as resources. So this is just very, very important. Here's the most important thing. Do you remember God made a promise to Abraham that he was going to give him this land? And he defined what this land was in Genesis 15, verse 18. Up until this point, the Israelites had not yet conquered all of the land. Go back and look in Genesis and see. It's a huge territory. David and his mighty men conquered all of the land that God listed to Abraham. This was huge. So in the time that the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and first went into the land, they captured a little bit, but not all of it. In the time of the Judges, a little bit, but not all of it. Here it is with David and his mighty men that the prophecy is fulfilled, that they conquer all of the land that God had promised to their forefather, Abraham. And that's just amazing. We haven't read about it yet, but I'm just letting you know it is coming. Now, back to the part about King Arthur and the loyalty of the Knights of the Round Table. I just mentioned that because it's a story I think you're probably familiar with and can relate to as we read about the loyalty of these mighty men to David. In the story today, David makes an offhand remark, "Oh, I'd love to have some water from that well back in Bethlehem." Remember, this is the Bethlehem where Jesus was born, that's first of all, so you know that. This is where David was from. And he just makes this offhand remark, probably not even thinking that he was going to have this water anytime soon. Well, guess what? Some of his men heard him say that. And they risked their life going into enemy lines to get this water and to come out and bring it to David. When they bring it to David, he can't believe it. Now, he doesn't drink it, but don't let that communicate to you that he didn't appreciate it. No, no, no. The reason he poured it out as an offering to the Lord was because he valued their loyalty and their action and their love for him so incredibly much. You know, in the last episode in the Merlin series, the knights are they're exiled, and the knights are expressing their loyalty to King Arthur. King Arthur is a little bit unsure. How is he going to get the kingdom back? And one of the knights, and then later two more, say the same thing to him. I would go to the mouth of hell and back for you. And I believe these mighty men would say the same thing to David. They risked their life. They came back. They brought him something that just because David said he wanted, they wanted to give him. And I believe that it was because David appreciated and valued their loyalty so much that he wanted to do the best thing that he could with this water. He could have chosen to drink it, but a better option would be to give it to the Lord. That would be a higher thing to do, to pour it out before the Lord. Reminds me of the time that Mary came and poured out a year's worth of perfume, a year's salary. That was what the value of that perfume was that she poured over Jesus' feet. And other people mocked her, remember, and said, oh, what a waste. But it was her free will offering to the Lord, just like David poured the water out as a free will offering to the Lord. He loved his men and he loved his God. Now here's the application for today. The world needs Christians whose loyalty to Jesus is like the loyalty of David's men. So how about your loyalty? Would you go inside enemy lines and back for the love of your Lord? How far does your loyalty go? Just something to think about today. Well, thank you so much for being with me. It's been my pleasure to be with you. Blessings and shalom to you, my friends. Until next time.